Hey guys, how's it going? In this video, we're going to be doing an unboxing, and I'm going to give my first impressions on the Galaxy A06. This is Samsung's newest and most affordable smartphone. I purchased it myself for $120. I'll have some links to it in the description if you want to check it out for yourself. It comes in 3 different colors. We have light blue, gold, and this black color we're going to be checking out here today. And there's 3 different configurations of this phone. We have 4 gigabytes of RAM and 64 gigabytes of storage, which is what I have here. We also have an upgraded 4 gigabyte RAM and 128 gigabyte storage model, and there's a max 6 gigabyte RAM and 128 gigabyte storage for more money. But so we're not all staring at a box, let's go ahead and check out the Galaxy A06. On the top, we have our device. Let's see what else we get in the box. Inside the box, we have a SIM ejector tool, in addition to a USB Type-C to Type-C charging cable, in addition to a little bit of paperwork. That's everything inside the box, no charger included. Let's go ahead and check out the star of the show here, the Galaxy A06. First impressions immediately out of the packaging. We have a pretty decently sized phone here given the price, but taking a physical tour, we have this ribbed design on the back, which gives it a lot of reflections depending on your lighting situation. Here's our first look at the dual lens setup. We have a 50 megapixel camera on this in addition to a 2 megapixel depth sensor, which is just going to help with the focusing and bokeh effect on your pictures. On the right side, we have our volume rockers and our power button with the fingerprint sensor built in. Absolutely love. We have a built-in fingerprint sensor. This is a little upgrade over the A05. On the bottom, we have a headphone jack. We have a mic, have our Type-C port capable of 25 watt super fast charge, and we have our single bottom firing speaker. On the left side, we just have our SIM tray at the top, which inside here we have room for a micro SD card up to 1 terabyte additional storage, and we have 2 SIM slots here, so love the versatility of the SIM slot. And on the top, we have one more mic and a couple of noteworthy physical refinements compared to the A05 from last year. We have a thinner phone here now at 8 millimeters instead of 8.8 millimeters. And this is also slightly lighter in weight on this A06, coming in here on my scale at 185 grams. So a large phone with a big display, beefy battery, and a slimmed down physical form factor. Let's go ahead and boot up the Galaxy A06. Taking our first look at the 6.7-inch display, still have a teardrop design on the top here, but doesn't look as intrusive as some of the previous generations of this phone. Of course, we do have still a little bit of chin here on the bottom, but the screen to body ratio is slightly improved on this A06 from the A05 and some of the previous gens. The A01 actually only had a 5.7-inch screen. Initially, the screen looks pretty bright, especially for this price range. Viewing angles might not be the most ideal, but overall, really looking forward to jumping into this phone because of the price. So I'm going to use this for the day, and I'll come back with my final first impressions on the Galaxy A06. Alright, so it's been a few days now since I first started using this Galaxy A06. I'm definitely ready to share some of my first impressions with you guys. So getting into the phone, the Biometrics, we have the side-mounted fingerprint sensor. I absolutely love this, mainly because you barely have to press it. You just press it for a split second. It gets you in every single time without fail. So really like the fingerprint sensor. We also have face recognition on this, but it doesn't work as quick. So this also gets you in pretty quick, but just not as quick and responsive and instant as that fingerprint sensor. And once you're in, you'll be greeted by the 6.7-inch PLS LCD display. Now, something interesting to consider with this A06 specifically in the 6.7-inch screen size is that when you compare this phone to the rest of Samsung's A-series lineup of devices, this is the only one that has that larger 6.7-inch screen. We have the A15, 25, 35, and 55 here. All of these have 6.5 and 6.6-inch displays. You would have to bump up to the Galaxy S24 Plus until you get yourself a 6.7-inch screen on a Samsung phone, and even with these side by side, this screen still actually does look a little bit larger, surprisingly. And even though this is bottom of the barrel specs as far as a screen goes here for a smartphone in 2024, I've been using this Samsung Tab A9 for most of the year. This also has a near 720p display, and I can definitely notice the pixels way more on this Tab A9. So for example, if I show this YouTube logo here, you can see the pixels on the edge of the actual YouTube red logo there, the A06. It's definitely less jaggedy on the red edges of the YouTube logo. So there are other devices I've used this year that you can definitely notice the pixels way more to the point where it's distracting to use the device, whereas whereas on this A06, it's definitely not as bad. However, you're just not going to have as crisp of an image for even if you step up to one tier higher, the Galaxy A15 here. This has a 1080p display. So really any tier of Samsung phone higher than this one is going to get you a better screen, but we do have that great screen size. So even though the 720p resolution isn't too bad in my initial use, I can notice the 60 Hz refresh rate. I know it's not the biggest deal to everybody, but every other Samsung phone at this point has at least a 90 Hz refresh rate, if not a 120 Hz refresh rate. But when you're not looking at this compared to Samsung's other options and just using it in your average everyday life, I've noticed that the screen is definitely good enough for your average needs. When you have this phone outside, direct sunlight, I can still definitely see the display clearly, and when I'm just using this around the house, even if I'm in a well-lit room, the screen is plenty bright. Now, as far as actually doing things on the phone, this is packed with the MediaTek Helio G85 processor. So in my initial testing, this is definitely more of a budget processor, but so let's just show a few examples here. Let's open up YouTube. You can see that actually did not take all that long to load, so depending on your application, might not actually be too bad. Let's try out the Bible app here. Sometimes this one takes a little bit of time to load depending on the device. So you can see it did just take a few seconds there to load that up. Let's just jump into Gmail. That didn't take that long to load either, so a lot of your basic apps should be fine. So even though this is Samsung's cheapest phone, I would say that the performance is actually pretty good again considering for the price point. It's also worth mentioning that the 4 GB of RAM has been fine for me in my first few days of use. See, just switching here between some of my most recent apps that I previously just had open, you can see I am able to open back up into those. They don't restart or anything. So I've had no issues initially with the RAM, just using a few different applications, switching between things. And overall, you can see the performance is generally smooth and as far as the just UI and scrolling through various things. But then pushing this phone a little bit harder with some gaming tests, if you do something more intensive, like for me personally, I like to play Super Mario Strikers on Dolphin Emulator on a lot of my Samsung devices, but unfortunately on this A06, it doesn't seem to work super great. It runs well for a minute or two, but then it starts to lag a lot. So I would definitely avoid this phone if you're looking to do more intensive gaming, but lighter gaming, to my surprise, actually worked really well in this phone. It's like OldSchool Runescape, this ran perfectly fine for me in my initial testing. I also did some Stardew Valley for a bit, and that also runs perfectly fine at 60 Hz refresh rate, runs very smooth. Again, compared to some previous gen Samsung devices priced higher than this would have a lot of lag on this game. And again, having that slightly larger 6.7-inch screen does go a long way for me personally when playing games like this. I was also still able to do some of my lighter emulation, so playing Nintendo DS games was no problem at all. So even though some of the more intensive things didn't really work out, most of my lighter gaming tasks were perfectly fine on this phone. And after doing all this testing and just using the phone for a couple of days, something that I really noticed, something that stands out the most to me with this device is how thin and lightweight it truly is for a 6.7-inch screen device. Something I noticed with all the other A series phones in the lineup is that they have smaller screens, but the same battery capacity. So a lot of these are slightly thicker phones. You do notice that little bit of extra bulk and heft in the hand. It's about a 0.5 millimeter thickness of difference. And even though it is an entire plastic build, we have no aluminum or glass or anything here. I personally really just like the feel of this phone in the hand. It doesn't get super hot when you're playing those games or anything. Now, as to be expected at this price, there are definitely some downsides with this phone. Not deal breakers necessarily, but just things that you are missing on this compared to a higher end Samsung phone. One of those being just the single bottom firing speaker. Now, it definitely gets loud enough. The audio doesn't clip on it like on the original Galaxy A01, but here's a little sound bit. So it gets plenty loud, but when I am watching content, I can just tell that you don't have as good of an audio experience without the dual speaker setup. Flipping back to the cameras, we have what looks like a dual lens setup. However, as I mentioned before, we have just the 50 megapixel main lens, but the main selling point here is definitely that 50 megapixel mode, where if you pixel peep, look side by side to the standard 12 megapixel shots versus using that 50 megapixel mode, you can definitely see we have more pixel density here. So it is nice to get some extra clarity at this price point. When you look at zooming capabilities, we have 2x, 4 times, and this 10 times digital zoom is the max, but pictures always come out blurry. On the selfie side, we just have a 8 megapixel camera, nothing spectacular here, and images can be blurry if you don't have the phone perfectly still and capturing it at the exact right moment. On the video side of things, we do have 1080p 60 on the rear, so it is nice that we have a bit of a smoother frame rate on this lower end phone, and videos initially look pretty fine. This is the front facing camera. This films in just 1080p, but as far as the resolution itself, looks pretty good, gets the job done. But now switching back to some of the other upsides of this phone, one of them definitely being the battery life. Battery life is very good on this phone. I was able to get 8 hours of screen on time over the course of 2 full days in my first battery cycle. Mind you, this included 2.5 to 3 hours of gaming, 20 minutes of using the camera in preparation for this video, a lot of high brightness being used outdoors, an hour and a half of watching YouTube videos, and an hour and a half of some productivity on Excel. So overall, a good mix of everything for 2 days of use. Feels like very good battery life to me initially. So I can confidently say this phone will give you at least 2 days of battery life. And I'm also very happy to see Samsung's 25-watt super fast charging on their most affordable phone. So I'm able to get well over 50% in 30 minutes of charge time and near to full in a little over an hour. However, the last 10% does still take a little while to top back up to a full 100%. But overall, first impressions of the Galaxy A06, despite some of its shortcomings, this feels like a good phone overall for the price. The larger and bright screen, the lighter weight and thin feel in the hand, the good battery life, these are the things that stand out to me the most. And considering I paid $120 for this brand new, right near the time of release, depending on when you're watching this video, this phone could be $100 or even less. So I can highly recommend this phone to a lot of people out there watching this video. This is the perfect device for a grandparent or someone who just needs a bigger screen. If you're watching this and thinking the specs don't meet your expectations, then this could still be a great secondary or backup phone. And of course, if you have just a little bit more budget, you can definitely get a beefed up display on any higher A series tier phone from Samsung, like the A15. This is one tier higher for about $30 or $40 more. You're going to get a 90 hertz 1080p super AMOLED display, so definitely better displays on some of those higher end ones. But just looking at this device on its own, considering the price and all the pros and cons of it, I can definitely recommend this phone if you're on a bit of a budget. But I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on the Galaxy A06 down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to give it a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing to the Shane Symonds YouTube channel today, since I have a ton of reviews coming on all the other A series phones in the lineup. I've been using these throughout the year, just haven't gotten quite to making full reviews on them yet. But in the meantime, I do have a full review up of this Galaxy A15 if you want to consider something a step up from this A06. Be sure to leave a like on your way out. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.